Catalyst 2030 started life as a WhatsApp group among social entrepreneurs, connecting to envision real transformational change. Launched at the World Economic Forum in January 2020, it's grown into a global movement accelerating change to ensure the SDGs are reached by 2030. Fueled by passion, our 550 members working in 175 countries have collectively put in an amazing 50,000 volunteer hours, touching the lives of 2 billion people. And we're driven by values, to which we hold ourselves accountable. 2020 was a busy year, co-creating 3 reports with partners and producing one of our own. Inviting high-level guests to participate in the Catalyzing Change campaign, hosting fireside chats and expert hours, which will be continuing in 2021. To celebrate our achievements, together we placed our supporters in the limelight with the first Catalyst 2030 Awards for Systemic Change. With the blessing of the Dalai Lama, we celebrated finalists and winners in the following categories: special recognition for our early supporters, individual philanthropists, donor organizations, philanthropic intermediaries, corporate organizations, bi- and multilateral organizations, and 4 regional winners in the category of national governments. And now on to Catalyzing Change Week 2021. During this social entrepreneur-led event, we bring together diverse stakeholders in over 100 sessions to showcase their systems change efforts and the best practices that can accelerate our work in pursuit of the SDGs.
Okay, let's start. Hi, everybody. My name is Peter Beez from the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. I'm a senior policy advisor, senior because I'm beyond 30, I think. And we are going to present something about impact-linked finance. We, that is Katie Nave from Foote Capital. She's replacing Willy Foote, who's unfortunately not feeling 100% because he got the 2nd shot of vaccine. So he's excused, and we hope he feels well quickly. And the 3rd speaker is Bjorn Strüwer from Roots of Impact. So let's start with the slides, Bjorn. Sorry, I wanted to say, please present yourself, Katie, first, and then Bjorn, and then we start with the slides. Thank you. And last thing, in terms of housekeeping, we are going to record the session. So if you don't like this, then just leave, because we want to share it with as many people as possible. Katie, you have the word. Sorry.
Great. Thanks, Peter. Hi, everyone. Good to be here. I'm Katie Nave, Director of Impact and Partnerships at Root Capital, and have been working closely with Peter and Bjorn at SDC and Roots of Impact, as well as our colleagues at IDB Lab on a ImpactLinked Finance Sync project, which we'll explain in a moment, over the last 3 years. So great to be here. Over to you, Bjorn.
Yeah, thanks. Hi all, good to see you. My name is Bjorn. I'm the founder and CEO at Roots of Impact. We are a specialized advisor for innovative and blended finance, and we are actually, together with SDC, the pioneers in social impact incentives we will present in a minute. Over to you, Peter. I will share my screen now.
Okay, so we are not going to present too long so that there's enough space for questions and answers and discussion. It's about impact-linked finance, subtitle An Arrow in the Development Quiver. Next slide, please. Yeah. It's finance, impact-linked finance. We will learn more in detail what we understand by this. But as you know, if you are working as a social enterprise or as an impact enterprise and you want to grow and you want to reach out to more people and have more impact, what do you need? You need funding. Who needs funding? Hands up. Well, 80% of impact, more than 80% of impact enterprises that are serving the bottom of the pyramid have something in common. they are not operating at or near scale and are not ready to take on investment. That means they could do much more. They could go to much higher levels of impact, have much more scale, but for this they need finance, and to take finance you need to be ready for investment. And unfortunately, everybody or many of them are not near scale, and they are not ready to take on investment, which is really a problem. So what we want to have a look at here in this presentation is there's a double bottom line. And what you can see, if you are acting as a social enterprise, very often you create a lot of social value, which is not fully captured by the market. So you have on the one hand, the left bar, the social value, which may be great, but you cannot capture everything on the market and get out of this a financial value that you need to pay your costs and to pay back your investors and things like this. So the idea is that social value, as we defined by Social Value International, is the value that people place on the changes they experience in their lives. And some of, but not all of this value is captured in market prices. Think of, let's say, an improved cook stove. So the vendor of the cook stove may charge $15 or $20, depending on the context. But he will create perhaps much more positive externalities with the families. They can get back the money very soon. So they will have a lot of social additional value to the $20 they have spent. But unfortunately, the vendor cannot capture all this value in the market price because they just don't have more than $20 to spend on an improved cook stove. That's an example for a mismatch. Next slide, Bjorn. So we are all happy that there's impact investing, and we all know that this is these are enormous amounts of money available, and they want to be invested in impact. But if you have a closer look, then you can see that most of these investors, 85%, seek risk-adjusted market rate returns or below market rate returns, closer to market rate, which means simply they want to have their capital back plus an interest that is close to what they would earn in other markets too. So it's the 67%. They just have the same thing. They want the same amount of profitability they would get out of an investment in the United States or in Europe or in Brazil. So these are the 67, and only a few of them say, okay, a little bit less, and only 15 are below, far below market rate returns, but still want to have their capital back. So impact investing alone is not enough to close the gap. Next slide, please. So what if social returns would really matter for business? Not only the financial returns, but the social returns as well. What would change if this would be the case? Bjorn, your turn.
So this was actually the question we asked ourselves back in 2015. And we were actually thinking about ways how we could actually remunerate social entrepreneurs for the value, actually for all the value they create, and monetize in particular the social value. You know this already from the carbon market, so it's a common concept that reduction of emissions is monetized, that you earn credits for this, but this was not done in the social sector yet, or for social entrepreneurs, for businesses who actually create this social value. And this is actually how it came to social impact incentives. And here you can actually see what happens through this model. So you see a kind of exemplary profit and loss of a social enterprise. And the payments, so social impact incentive are actually straight payments to social entrepreneurs, monetizing their impact, which means we are paying regularly for the impact of the enterprise, a certain price. We agree upon this price upfront. And this in turn enables them to raise investment because their profitability and their commercial prospects are immediately much better, incorporating actually this additional revenue stream from social impact incentives. And here you can see how this is from a structural perspective. So on the one side, on the left side, you see an outcome payer, which is in our case, the Swiss Development Corporation, committing to pay premium payments for social outcomes to the impact enterprise. So the impact enterprise benefits over a term of, let's say, 3 or 4 years sometimes from these payments. And in turn, they can actually, after building this into their financial model, they can reach out to investors and raise investment and scale their business and actually deliver these kind of pre-committed outcomes. So in a nutshell, it's a quite straightforward pay for impact model, but always combined with private investment so that we can be sure that the impact enterprise is able to scale when they are delivering impact. Here's a quote from one of the entrepreneurs running Novolis. And Greg actually wrote us after we had a nice discussion about the terms and in particular the outcomes he would commit to. This sentence, and this is just to say that it's not about we are not telling the entrepreneurs what they have to do. It's actually based on a serious discussion with them about what is your strategy, what is your vision, what do you actually want to achieve, and what couldn't you achieve so far because you had financial constraints. So where can we help you actually to close the commercial viability gap? And this is very important to really co-create this matrix and this deal with the entrepreneurs. How does this look like in practice? We brought 2 examples. One is presented by Peter, which is a direct transaction with an enterprise in Mexico. And the other one is presented by Katie. And she can then shed light into how this works for Root Capital. Over to you, Peter.
Okay. So we met Clínicas del Azúcar in Mexico, Bjorn, Rory, and me, and talked to them and thought maybe we could do something with Clínicas del Azúcar because they have a network of clínicas, so they were on a growth path. They wanted to set up 200 clinics over the next years, and they were, of course, seeking finance for this. You need a lot of money to do this. And they were concerned about conserving their mission, their social mission, and have a high percentage of poor people that come to the clinics too. And so we said, okay, let's do something together. Here you see Javier on the right on the photo in the blue shirt, and he was motivated by setting up these clinics because his mother was, of course, ill and with diabetes, and he thought, okay, I think every person should have treatment like my mother. So the idea with them was not only to maintain a certain percentage of poor people when they grow fast, but even to increase this percentage. So that's our mission at SDC. We want to serve more low-income people. And of course, we said, well, we want to keep the quality of treatment at a good level as well for them. So here you see these 2 metrics, how we incentivize the impact. So we wanted to have a higher number of base of the pyramid patients have access to a high quality treatment. Some of them that was for the first time or a lot even. So that was the metric number 1, the ratio of the clients, low income clients among Clínicas del Azúcar's active members. The second one was that these patients receive specialized treatment and show improvements in their HbA1c levels. That is the blood sugar level. Clínicas del Azúcar has a very good methodology to get this down. And of course, as you heard before in the explanation of the sync model, we always tie the contract, the sync contract, the sync payments to the condition that they raise in investment. In this case, it's a no-brainer if you want to open up more clinics. Yeah, well, how are you going to do this without investment? But that's what they did, raising investments. And here are the results. Next slide, please, Bjorn. Of course, we are seeking additionality. So what would have happened with and without us? And it's a little bit small. What you can see in the first graph is that you have on the y-axis the number of POP clients, and on the x-axis, you have the number of years. So starting from the point where we started our collaboration with sync payments, without sync payments, they would have, according to the calculations of a researcher from the MIT, they would have ended up with something like 10,000 clients after 5 years. It's the gray curve is what would have happened without our project, and the blue one is what happens with our project. And you can see that we were lucky, or we were able, together with Clínicas de Azúcar, to change a little bit their business model, so that the percentage of BOP members is constantly increasing, and of course with more clinics and more clients, where the number is growing as well. And as you all know, you cannot count these effects forever. So you make a cut, let's say after 5 years, 3 years of payment, and 5 years of running taking more effects into account. And you can see that 10,000 additional BOP patients are receiving treatment thanks to this sync operation. And that's of course a fantastic success if you take into account, and that's what you can see on the right-hand side of the graph, that the sync payments from SDC via the IDB lab were only $275,000. So that's a little bit what SDC paid, plus of course transaction costs, structuring and everything, but still not much beyond 300,000. In the financial leverage, you can see here in the first round, they raised investment of 1.5 million from different investors. That's what we can claim as a condition to our contract. So that was going in the right direction. And as they wanted to grow fast, and afterwards, IDB themselves led another 2 million, and I've seen others another 4 million. So it was 7.5 million investments within 2 years. So that's really a fantastic story, and all this can be found on the website of Roots of Impact, with a detailed story, and as well the data analysis report by Ari Bonsola. So that's a case where STC or via IDB Lab had a direct contract for paying sync payments to Clínicas de Azúcar based on these two metrics we presented before. Okay, next one is Root Capital. Katie, your turn.
Great, thank you, Peter. Go ahead to the next slide, Bjorn. At Root Capital, we invest in the growth of agricultural enterprises so that they can transform rural communities by providing smallholder communities with reliable access to farm inputs, credit markets, and training to increase production and incomes. By way of background, that's what we do. So we know that growth in the agricultural sector is at least 2 times more effective at raising incomes in poor communities than other sectors. And we know that agricultural SMEs are one of the most compelling avenues for agricultural growth. However, these enterprises typically fail to realize their full impact potential, in large part because they fall into what's often referred to as the missing middle of agricultural finance. That is, they're too small or too risky for commercial lenders, but they also have financing needs too large for microfinance institutions. So those are the ones that you see there in the white space in the figure. Root Capital provides working capital and training to these agricultural SMEs with loans that typically range from about 250,000 to 2 million, which is where you can see the dotted line sort of picking up again in the figure and continuing upward. There are, of course, many agricultural SMEs with financing needs lower than 250,000. These SMEs are extremely hard to serve, even for an impact-first investor like Root Capital. And the result is that these SMEs fall off the credit cliff, so to speak. Next slide. So why are these SMEs so hard to serve? It's due to a market failure, a critical market failure. The cost to serve these businesses for an investor like Root Capital is too high relative to the interest rates that they can afford to pay. As a result, capital does not flow to this market, and in fact, upwards of 90% of SMEs in emerging markets lack access to credit, a gap estimated at about $1 trillion globally. What's more is that inadequate financing for these SMEs is their single leading constraint to growth. So what is needed is a market correcting incentive that recognizes the high risks and costs, but also the potential positive impact associated with serving this market segment, which you can see shown in gray in the figure, where our loans do not generate enough revenue to cover our cost to serve, to make them. This is where SYNC came in, our SYNC project, Social Impact Incentives project with SDC, Roots of Impact, and IDB Lab. This incentive model rewards Root Capital for lending to agricultural SMEs in Latin America that may be unprofitable to serve today, but demonstrates substantial promise for growth and impact in the future. So together with Roots of Impact, SDC, and IDB Lab, we created a differentiated outcome payment structure linked to the impact that we aimed for through this project and the costs associated with generating that impact. The data-driven incentive structure was based on analysis of 15 years of Root Capital's lending data, and we used that data to precisely determine the cost associated with reaching our priority impact criteria. One of the beautiful things about SYNC is that it directly ties cost barriers to generating impact and provides a corresponding incentive in order to reduce those barriers. So as you can see here, our SYNC project was focused on filling a critical credit gap for SMEs with financing needs less than $500,000, the break-even point for Root Capital's loans. And so therefore the outcomes here, the metrics focused on additionality, which is loans that other lenders wouldn't make, and loan amounts. As I mentioned earlier, the smaller the loan amount, the less likely Root Capital is to break even. And then we also included a bonus for additional efforts to target and finance businesses that are inclusive of women, given the significant gender barriers women face in agriculture. Next slide. So what were we able to do? So last year we wrapped up our 2-year SYNC project with results that I think even took us by surprise. With just $1 million in outcome payments from SDC and IDB Lab, we were able to invest $12 million of debt that we raised externally, invest that in 32 agricultural SMEs in Latin America. Those 32 SMEs used that $12 million in financing to generate $48 million in revenue, of which they paid $41 million onto 9,300 smallholder farmers. That's an average per farmer payment of about $4,000. Next slide. What's more is that SYNC had an important impact on the way we work as Root Capital. We adjusted our internal policies and practices such that SYNC could and would incentivize this lending, and we found that it did. With SYNC, we were able to reach 13 new clients, about a 30% increase over the previous year's new clients that we were able to bring in. We more than doubled the percentage of loans that no other lender would make, neither a commercial or social lender, illustrating how the incentive helped us really manage the additional risk of lending to this otherwise unbanked sector. And we maintained the percentage of loans we made at 300,000 or less, sort of the most expensive loans for us to make, during a time of more austere lending practices and policies at Root Capital. Go ahead to the next slide. Finally, as we hypothesized and had hoped, with financing these SMEs saw tremendous growth. With SYNC enabling Root Capital to reach these SMEs, our financing helped them grow measurably in just 18 months. So we saw that 56% of the SMEs grew their sales with an average year-on-year growth of 41%. we saw that 47% grew in both their financing needs and management capabilities to be able to receive subsequently larger loans from Root Capital, with about 9% of those breaking even or passing the break-even threshold for our lending, meaning that they no longer required a cost-correcting incentive for us to serve them, showing the sustainability of the model. And 9% were able to gain financing from other lenders after just one loan from Root Capital. Go ahead to the next slide. Great. Back over to you.
Bjorn, you have to unmute yourself. We can't hear you. Now it should work.
Sorry. Yeah, you have seen two quite successful examples how Sync was used for Clínicas del Azúcar in Mexico and for Root Capital across Latin America. And as Katie said several times, this incentive is actually market correcting. So this actually means it directly addresses a market failure. And after doing several of these transactions, and we are continuing to do that, we also realized that there are other ways to do this, let's say, this kind of market correcting mechanism. And it's always connected to the same idea, providing rewards for impact and providing better financing terms to enterprises who actually generate significant benefits for society, or also environmental impact. And so we started actually to incorporate the rewards into other financial instruments and created actually a new finance practice, which is called ImpactLinked Finance, where Sync is a part of. And here you see actually a framework for this. So while Sync was and still is a straightforward contract paying premiums to enterprises, very similar to carbon finance, but with the condition that the impact enterprises raise investment. So it's insofar it's a blended finance model. Impact-linked finance goes one step beyond and actually incorporates Sync and impact incentives in other financial instruments. And as such, it uses the full range of instruments of finance. And it's a kind of at the intersection of blended finance, impact investing, and results-based finance. And I give you one example just to highlight how this can be used in practice and how we are using it right now. So here you see an impact-linked loan. And it's rather easy to think about incentivizing additional impact in loans by just reducing the interest rate according to achievement of positive outcomes. Of course, these outcomes have to be measured very well, and the incentives also have to design very well. But if this is done and the enterprise achieves these kind of outcomes, we just go down with the interest rate. And this can really go really, really deep, as you see in the next slide. In particular, in times of pandemic in emerging and developing markets, there's sometimes even a need to go down to negative rates, which actually means a partly loan forgiveness. So what this actually means is we agree with entrepreneurs that if they exceed certain levels of impact, that they wouldn't need to repay parts of the loan, which of course provides a very strong incentive for them to do exactly this, and not in times of stress and liquidity constraints, not to focus only on actually pure cash flow, the commercial opportunity, but also to continue serving the ones who are most in need. And so we introduced this also in Latin America. providing so-called impact-linked emergency loans. And these loans can actually forgive up to 30% of the principal. However, in other regions of the world, we also use impact-linked loans just with a variable interest rate. So you can actually adopt this principle of linking impact to finance to all instruments. We do it with loans, with revenue share agreements, with guarantees, and we could theoretically also do it with equity, but it's a bit more tricky, of course. Yeah, this is a little bit what is going on in ImpactLinked Finance. We are hoping that we have also some entrepreneurs here in this call, and happy to have a discussion with you.
Okay, thank you very much. So the rest of the time we would like to spend with you discussing. So please raise your hands or go into the chat and ask questions, and we are happy to answer you these questions. You've heard ImpactLinked Finance is about closing a gap where the market doesn't work in terms of finance. There's a lot of innovation possible here. Not everything is yet finished. You can create so many things, and it highlights as well how important it is to measure and to manage your impact. If you don't measure and manage your impact, if you don't know how you are creating impact, then you're driving blind. But if you can do this and see this, then you can sell it. You can exchange it for better terms in finance. That's a little bit the idea for you. So who is breaking the ice and has a question? There's one. Okay. We have a first question. Have you explored alternate credit rating approaches? Bjorn, do you want to answer this one?
Sorry, what was the question again?
The question was, did we explore alternate credit rating approaches?
Not yet. So there are many, many options how we can actually apply this principle of better terms for better impact, we sometimes call it. This could also be a way for that. We never did it, but this is definitely a very interesting option to do it. But we, in particular at Roots of Impact, we work particularly with quite early stage enterprises and with private investment. So far we didn't do it that way.
Okay, then we have a question on which method do you use to measure impact? Well, I'm personally a fan of lean data, but it depends on what you find that exists already in the organization. You have seen the example from Clínicas de Azúcar. So they had clear data on who their clients were, from which strata they were. So we could clearly see what they have been in which category before. And who comes in which part of the base of the pyramid or income percentage they are. And then, of course, they had a lot of data in terms of where they are at the evolution of their HbA1c level, something like this, okay? And we could work on this. And you heard Katie on her data. She was collecting these data for a long time. And they still continue to do so, but perhaps Katie, you want to give a little bit more background on your impact measurement.
Yeah. So in general, the way our sync project is set up, because the outcome payments rely on achieving impact, that impact needs to be verified. And so with our sync model, as in other sync models, we have an external impact verifier, which is Roots of Impact are playing an independent verifier role. So Roots of Impact is responsible for reviewing that the impact criteria were met for each of our loans that we made each semester, which includes reviewing documentation, reviewing loan agreements, scoping out the sector, as well as deep dive in person or during COVID, Zoom-enabled interviews with our clients to understand whether the impact was indeed realized, and to validate that the impact that we'd aimed for was achieved each semester and can then trigger the outcome payment. We, as Root Capital, we've been around for 20 years, and so we have instituted a robust in-house impact measurement system where we collect financial, social, environmental data on each and every one of our lending clients on a yearly basis. And so we use that data to share with Roots of Impact to both minimize costs and enable them to make a verification of the impact achieved, in addition to, of course, the spot checking in-person interviews and data collection directly from our clients.
Thank you very much, Katie. Then we have another question which goes into this direction. Is there much variability in the prices attributed to social outcomes? What I can tell here is that SDC, the Swiss Agency for Development Cooperation, we are usually having a close look at the value, or as how we can quantify the value of the outcomes, because we do some kind of cost benefit analysis. We don't want to pay 300,000 for the change in the livelihood of poor people. That's only worth 200,000, okay? Because otherwise we could give the money cash to them. So that's always a bottom line. And then of course, so you shouldn't pay more than 200,000 in the example I gave to you. And then it's a question of negotiation, how much you pay for the social outcome. In the case of Root Capital, they clearly have shown that the costs or the loss they are making with individual loans. So you should obviously pay at least that much to them. And you have seen the value, social value they created was much more than that, 41 million revenues. Of course, the revenue is not profit, so profit is much lower, but still much more than what we paid in terms of impact. So somewhere in between, you have to find the right mix. As a donor, you want to pay as little as possible. As a social enterprise, you are of course happy to receive as much as possible, because then you have retained earnings, so you can reinvest to grow, and you have equity. And so that there's of course this tension between the two. And then as a donor or outcome payer, you can of course say, well, I think general results are very important for me. So I'm paying $1,000 more for this, like in the Root Capital case. So that's how you are going to try to find a price, an appropriate price for social outcomes. It depends very much on the enterprise, on the sector, on the country, on the time. And it always goes a little bit into the direction of cost benefit, see what kind of benefit is really accruing in the livelihood of the poor people. I hope this answers this question. Do you link impacts with SDGs? Yes, definitely. That's we usually have the SDGs as overall target before our eyes. So everything that contributes to SDGs is more or less considered impact for us. It depends very much on the outcome payer. If you have a foundation that only pays for, I don't know, cancer in Africa, then it can be only in health SDGs and not in climate change, okay? But SDGs is broader, and yeah. We have another question. Do research and capacity building activities count as viable impacts? For us, impact is a social change. So you start at the level of input activities where you try to intervene in the system. Then you have the outputs, which is a change of the system, the outcomes, which is the change of the performance of the system. And then the impact at the level of the final beneficiaries is usually change in improvement in the livelihood. So research and capacity building activities are not, from our point of view, an impact. They are rather an input. Sometimes they may be output, but that's at this level. And we don't want to pay for outputs. We don't want to pay for sold water filters or sold bookstops. We want to see the improvement in the livelihood of the people. We don't want to have a number of people treated in Clínicas de Azúcar. We want to see how their livelihood changes. That's the point. Their health improves. And then we have a question for Bjorn. You mentioned partial loan forgiveness. Who is footing the bill for this? Bjorn, you should know.
Yeah. We have friends in Switzerland who are paying the bill. No, seriously. So when we talk about these kind of models where we incorporate incentives in loans, for example, the question is, of course, who would actually really sacrifice financial returns for additional impact? And to be realistic, there are, of course, impact first investors who would do that to a certain extent, right? Let's say going down from 8% interest rate to maximum 5 or so. This is possible, and this is done by for example, huge private family offices or foundations who see themselves as impact first investors, as well as, for example, Root Capital. But if you really want to go deeper in terms of loan forgiveness, of course, there's no investor doing that. Then institutions like the Swiss Development Corporation or other donor organizations are engaging with these lenders and are actually compensating them for actually for the sacrifice they have. So they're offsetting any kind of losses of the investors, which is working very well. It's quite easy to implement because then it's just one receiver of grants. This is grant money then provided by the donors. So what we are doing right now in Latin America is backed and funded by the SDC as well. But we are also working on other models with other donors. So this space is not monopolized by the Swiss. So there are now 5 other countries who already work with social impact incentives or impact-linked finance. Yeah, so this is the answer to the question. This is then when the donor comes in, this is then also blended finance.
Okay, and then we have the $1 million question from Sasha Kramer from Haiti in soil. They are working in sanitation provision in Haiti, and that's a clear case where you have really a big part of the social value that is not covered because you cannot charge higher prices from poor people for providing sanitation, and a large part of the costs should be covered by the public sector because it's in fact it's their task to provide sanitation in a bidonville. But well, you know, not every country has the financial means, and so how can we make a case for sink in such a context? We thought about this. Of course we could provide sink payments to a company like Soil in Haiti, and force them as well to get an investor. But the big problem is after 3 years, they will not achieve sustainability because somebody has to pay for a long time or forever, I don't know, for this gap, because it's a public service that is provided. So if it's not provided by a sink outcome payer, what can you do? So the big challenge would be after 3 years, the investment has to be repaid, and you would have to downscale your operations if you don't find another outcome payer. But perhaps, Bjorn, you have a better answer and a new idea on this, how we can manage this continuous problem of having a flow to a company like Soil.
Yeah, so first of all, hi, Sasha, great to see that you are here. Yeah, considering this, I just want to say sink is not actually suitable to any organization, and we don't want to actually impose organizations to raise private investment or repayable capital if it simply doesn't fit. However, we still believe that there are better ways of public support or grant making than just putting a big grant out and giving it away for, let's say, for input related activities. We think, for example, in cases for Soil and for many other great companies who can demonstrate that they create massive social value, you could also structure performance-based contracts, which follow similar principles, paying for impact, but not necessarily leveraging private investment. And if the company needs upfront funding, actually to scale, performance-based contracts can also be structured in a way that there is an upfront payment and further payments are then linked to achievement of positive outcomes. And this would be beneficial, of course, for organizations like Soil in Haiti, for many other companies who are also in the water and sanitation sector. We are right now structuring 5 transactions in the wash sector at the same time. And we also learned that in particular, water kiosk or anyone active in providing clean water to underserved communities, this is a business model that can scale. And in sanitation, it's still super, super hard to build a business model, a self-sustaining, viable business model, because it creates massive value, but it's not, it's a public good, in short.
Yeah, the next question goes in the same direction. Will you only support social enterprises that are on a path to full commercial viability, or will you support ventures that are on a path to improve financial performance, but still expected to need a partial subsidy? Yeah, that's as we described before, there are two possibilities for exit. The simple version is Clínicas de Azúcar. They change their business model, they become more profitable because they go to scale and they don't need zinc any longer. Perfect. Somebody is, let's say somebody is producing water filters, he buys a new machine and can with this reduce unit costs, and zinc is just helping him for this first financing part, and then he goes to scale and everything is fine. Easy exit for us. The much more problematic one is where there's always the need for partial subsidy. So that would be a case for public sector exit. So if STC is no longer working in this area or with this partner, at least we have demonstrated that it can work. Then you find another donor, the public sector, local public sector, a charity, whatever, to close this gap. Ideally, one could convince the local state because it would be their turf. But that's, of course, much more complicated, you know, political economy or governance problems, negotiating a long-term contract with yearly budgets. That's much more complicated. We are still looking for solutions here. But again, that is as well a question to you as a social entrepreneur. Do we have this kind of context? Do we have ideas how you can go into this direction? If you are having already a hybrid model, probably your donors would be happy to see you become a little bit more efficient. Next question is whether SCC is looking to expand this program internally to work with more partners like Roots of Impact or Root Capital, and what might be the priority areas, locations. Yeah, that's a very good questions. We have a colleague from me here from STC who's listening as well. She could answer the part on Bangladesh, where they're running already a program with Roots of Impact with zinc. That's one example. We had other examples in the pipeline where we try to work with climate change and in Africa. And we have another program that is a kind of upscaling from the Root Capital experience. There's somebody from Root Capital who founded Aceli in Africa. So yes, we are trying to use this model, this ImpactLinked Finance, zinc payments, more and more in our collaboration. And so the next question is about behavioral outcomes. Are behavioral outcomes valuable as a leading indicator of impact? Do you track behavioral outcomes? Bjorn, can you help here? I don't understand fully the question.
Yeah, so I think I know what is meant. First of all, of course, this is a session where we also would like to hear the position of the Swiss Development Corporation. However, there are other donors who have other priorities, right? So, and in general, the question in ImpactLinked Finance is always and should start with the question, who is interested in specific outcomes? We know that, for example, the SDC is very focused on income increase in low-income countries and providing economic opportunities, gender impact, and several other very concrete outcomes. There are other funders who seek other outcomes, in particular, for example, behavioral change, etc. So the concept of impact-linked finance can be applied to everything. This is the message. If it is measurable and it can be directly related to the intervention or the business model of an organization, right? There was also, I now also see the chat, finally. There's also a question on education, for example. There are, of course, many, many organizations who are interested in outcomes in the education space. We did several transactions in vocational education, where the most relevant outcome is bringing people into jobs, decent jobs, and also retain them in these jobs. We are right now preparing also a program with primary and secondary education. So everything is possible. It's rather the question, who is actually the outcome payer here?
Yeah, perhaps to build on this, that's as well a little bit whom you find as an outcome payer. For instance, if the outcome payer is okay with that people are joining a secondary school, for instance, because of your activity and is paying for this as an outcome, well, yeah, then you use this as an outcome payment and you go to the investor and get the money. I heard about an NGO in Mexico who did this and got outcome payments for training people to get more children into secondary school, which is in the long run very good for the country. And good luck in measuring impact, yeah, livelihood of the people having a better income in 10 years. That would be, of course, far too late to pay for this. In vocational skills development, as Bjorn has said, you train somebody, you make sure that he gets into a job, you ask him how much he earns, you do this 3 and 6 months again to make sure he's still in the job, and then you have an outcome, of course. In education, it's it's more, it's far in the future. So there you have to work with other approaches. And again, it's a negotiation, what makes sense in this specific case. And yes, we are confident that we can do something like this in education with randomized controlled trials, whatever, based on other cost-benefit analysis. What's the value, the cost effectiveness of placing somebody in secondary school, in tertiary education, whatever. So there's room for this. And if you scroll down the chat, you will see there's as well a hint from Louise. Thanks a lot for this, with an example from the wash sector. And Amina from Bangladesh, she has given the link to the program in Bangladesh. She is managing Be Pretty. She's giving you the website. Have a look at the website, because there you find as well the innovative finance toolkit, which is not only for Bangladesh, but you can use it globally. So that's a very good one as well. So we are through the chat. We have answered all the questions. Any last comments? Otherwise, we are anyway running out of time, and we would close a little bit earlier. So if there are no more questions, comments, let me thank you on behalf of the organizers, SDC, Bjorn and Katie. A big thank you for Katie for helping us out. Thanks a lot to Bjorn, and thanks for all these very interesting questions. Have a great afternoon. Thanks a lot. See you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Take care.
Thank you.